creativity, like without any kind of input, there's nothing to work with. Like there's nothing that you can change or you can work with. You can do your output like suffers. So as a creative, it's your professional responsibility to keep on feeding inspiration in. So I like the idea of like thinking about inspiration, like the word meaning breathe in or spirit in, and then incarnation into flesh. So if there's no inspiration coming in, no breath coming in, there's no flesh that can actually be incarnated.
Welcome to our interview today. Today, we are super privileged to have on the call Pierre du Plessis. Pierre du Plessis is a longtime friend of mine. I have met Pierre in church world, but since then we've collaborated and worked together on all kinds of projects in all kind of contexts. Today, Pierre is a creative chameleon working as creative director, as futurist, as artist, venturing into the customer experience space, which is super exciting. And we'll talk a lot about that today as well. But Pierre, welcome on the call. I'm so glad to have you. I've been looking forward to have this opportunity to catch up and just talk about some exciting things in your life and in your world and all the things you've been doing. Welcome. I'm so glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here. And I was just thinking before the call, I think our friendship and partnership has spanned like 20 years, I think. Probably like
Yeah.
20, maybe. Yeah, almost. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's so long. And what is interesting is just how much you've evolved and grown and all the things just in work, but in life as well. I mean, but I'm just thinking about work, all the different things and seasons you've gone through, and me as well. And somehow the creativity and the artistry and all of that has stood the test of time.
Has
Somehow
remained.
it has
Somehow it
remained.
has remained. Yeah, it has
It's
remained.
maybe hopefully it's gotten purer and purer. It got distilled over the years. But yeah, that's what we're here to talk about. So I think just kicking off, the very first thing, we talked about this a little bit before, at some point for all of us. For me, it was one specific afternoon in 1999 when I had a pivotal conversation with a friend over coffee, which ended up in an audition, which changed my life and my career for the next 30 years. But I mean, for you, I know you've had an experience similar to that, that's put you on this creative path, especially as it translates into your work and everything you've done now. But I mean, you were super young. Why don't you just talk us through that experience? What happened? What was it about that experience that just put you on this creative trajectory?
Yeah, that's an interesting that's an interesting little story, and I always laugh when I think about it. Is I was very young. I think I was about maybe 10 years old or 11 years old, and my parents took us to the State Theatre in Pretoria and to see a ballet. And it's sort of a very weird thing for maybe a 10-year-old boy in South Africa in the 80s to go and watch a ballet. But we went and watched this ballet, Coppelia, and I remember it so distinctly. It was such a defining moment in my life because as we were watching it and I was sitting there, I was going, I cannot believe that people can make stuff like this. This is incredible. It was completely blowing my mind. Like the sets and the lighting and the emotional experience and like the whole kind of experience of it just blew my mind. And I think from about that point, I was always dabbling in arts and trying to create these expressions and experiences and communicate and trying to, I suppose, recapture that emotion that I felt as like a 10-year-old Afrikaans boy in Pretoria, like sitting and watching a very weird ballet. But that was one. And there's like a couple of other moments I think in my life where I realized like you get drawn back to creative, like you try and leave it, but it doesn't leave
Mm.
you, and then you have to go back to
Mm.
it over and over again. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of sticks with you through your life, and there's you're 100% right. There's this pivotal moment or experience that happens, and for most of us, we can probably trace our creative drive back to that one specific thing that happened with us. And I often wonder for myself, if it wasn't for that one moment, that one conversation, that one person, if I ever would have ended up being the person I am now, doing what I'm doing now. But then sometimes I think I probably would have, just through some other avenue or some alternative trajectory.
Yeah, I think the muse tends to find you. It tends to work through, work through us, not necessarily with or without our consent.
Just like Agent Smith said in the Matrix, it's inevitable. It's going to happen either way.
Yeah, the sound of inevitability.
It's the sound of inevitability. All right. So okay. So that happened. Then you were 10 years old, right? 10 years old.
Yeah, I think about 10 years. Yeah, standard three.
So so then, I mean, just talk us through the last couple of decades. How did your career unfold? I know that you didn't take the traditional, conventional route of like doing all the normal things that people would do in all the right order. So just talk us through, how did your career develop,
Yeah.
and where are you now, and what is it that you're doing on a daily basis now for work?
Sure. So my career is interesting. It's an interesting pathway to say the least. So I left high school of grade graduated high school in the late 90s and then went to study fashion design. And always when I tell this story, I tell also people, in my defense, South Africa still had a fashion industry in the 90s and manufacturing fashion industry. And we had factories and fabrics and everything. And went to study fashion design, which for a couple of reasons I was fascinated by like the technical aspects of it and the expression and the experience you can create. I was, I think, more interested in creating the shows, maybe it's the ballet remnant, than
Yes.
really entering into the business of it. And then from fashion, it was a easy sort of transfer or transition, not necessarily by choice, but into the advertising industry, into like the styling and art direction and that sort of industry, because those two things are sort of adjacent. And then I spent quite a few years I think about 10 or 15 years as a freelance stylist and art director, and then eventually creative director, I started working in TV and TV ads, TVCs, and then did one film, I think, for my sins. And I could never, ever in my entire life do it again. And then ended up working in print advertising, so billboards and magazine ads and those sort of things, like working on that mostly. And at the same time, I was working in church where we met as well. So, and
Hmm.
then finding expression and creative expression in that, which I think church spaces can be really creative spaces, and creating those again, like those experiences, and then working with those things. And what was interesting from that part of my life was that it those spaces are these actually like these content producing machines that you bringing out new content like every single week, and new print and new this and new that. And then we played a lot around with those little different ideas and trying to do unique and creative things, and did like really weird bumper stickers and all sorts of crazy stuff. And during that, at that same time, we started, me and a couple of friends, we did a small little branding, like boutique branding agency, working with like small, almost like mom and pop shops, just
Mm.
helping people get like proper brands out there, and build that for quite a number of years. And then, well, I did actually so many different things. We worked as well. One of the most exciting things that I did was we worked with the SBS Design Institute, where we started working with small businesses like startups and people that have like an idea for a design, and they would come into the institute, and we would workshop the idea, redesign it, make it, more aesthetically pleasing, build a business model around it, and develop the brand developed by like a marketing strategy, like the whole kind of business idea. And which from then on, my love for business and making things also kind of started. So I think that was like the biggest part of my journey for the last couple of years. And at that same time, about 10 years ago, I started teaching and speaking a lot more publicly, like speaking with corporates and businesses and all sorts of different places. A lot about just marketing, storytelling, how to like grow your business through storytelling. And then also at the same time, I have this kind of spirituality and human development background where you want people to be better people. So I have these two tracks in my life where want somebody to become like who they're supposed to become or what they're being invited into to grow into that. And at the same time, this creative track. So and they fit actually well together for a long time in my life. I couldn't consolidate them. I think in the last couple of years, I managed to finally go, okay, but good people make good things. So we need to work on both. If we only work on the creativity, it's sometimes not authentic or not, or maybe a little bit hollow. But then if you work on the person as well, or with the person to help them get to where they want to go, and those two things actually start working together quite nicely. So I think that's sort of like the big kind of broad strokes of my career. So the last couple of years have been spent speaking, teaching, and then also working with startups, businesses, consulting. The last 2 years, I've been working with a tech startup that we did uh, life coaching, study skills coaching for kids and teens. So it's called coachbit.com. And I recently left that business, but in that business, we were really building out like long customer journeys and figuring out, but how do you get the key problem was like, how do you get a kid that doesn't want study skills coaching? His parents are forcing him to do it. It's like 13-year-old kid that's interested in like gaming and has ADHD now has to go and do like academic coaching. And the challenge is how can we think of it creatively about building a journey that this kid will want to go on, like that they will get engaged, that they'll want to. And how could we build that product out and build the brand out, the communication and the content? And it was again like this content building kind of machine, which led me to my current space where I'm more and more working with customer experience, like building out these journeys, which maybe goes all the way back to ballet. Now that I think about it, it's like
The
getting that
circle is
experience.
complete.
The circle is complete. I had a very interesting conversation just this morning with somebody who designs spas for a living. I thought spas like the grocery store. It's like not like spas like the grocery store. Spas like the massage kind of facial place. And so they do spas for wine farms and hotels. And I was like, that's a business. Like you can do that for a living. And so we had a great conversation about how annoying a spa experience can be when the slippers don't fit because they never fit. They're always
Mm.
terrible. It's like, why do you have terrible slippers in your spa? It's like, it's such so important to have like good slippers and have this like good experience.
Ay,
So
ay, ay.
yeah, so that's like kind of broad strokes about how my career was, or how
All
it's
right.
led me to this space.
So there's a couple of themes that I think, and I'm not sure if you ever thought about it this way, but there's obviously a making theme of yourself being involved and putting things into existence that didn't exist before. That whole idea of being a hands-on creator, but also as that evolves into understanding communication, understanding people and how they perceive their world and experience their world, into this whole idea of experience and journeys, and then business that kind of connects all these things and makes it sustainable and helps it to extrapolate value for people. The whole idea of making it, of monetizing those things and making it commercially valuable. So I think when you put all these things in a basket, here's my question: is I know for me, sometimes the different aspects of the things that I'm either interested in or makes my work valuable sometimes end up in tension with each other. And oftentimes I feel I have to resolve the one at the cost of the other, or just live in the tension, which is uncomfortable all of the time, for me at least. But for you, I mean, being involved in so many things and being good at so many things, and also having to understand how to make all these things commercially viable, also bring the business side into it. What are some of those tensions for you, if any? And then how do you live with those tensions? How do you make those tensions meaningful, or do you resolve them, or how do you do it?
So that's a really good observation. And it's definitely a tension that I felt between these two worlds of working and helping people become who they're supposed to be and making, like this idea of creating different products and designs or art and business, like mixing business into those things as well, because sometimes those things are conflicting, like art. often conflicts with business. You're not supposed to monetize art technically, and you're not supposed to monetize helping people become who they are. Like it feels like almost like sometimes even a little bit perverse to kind of make those things into businesses. But at the same time, I think how I've sort of semi-resolved the tension is that business, like as you said, like makes those things sustainable. Like if you want to continue making art, if you want to be continue helping people, like how do we actually build a system around it that will makes those things valuable, and then it actually solves problems. And I think for me, the way I've resolved these things and with business as well is that business fundamentally is really about solving a problem and like serving somebody. So I know, I think we both do like love Seth Godin and the way that he writes. And I love the way that he talks about customers. He doesn't talk about customers. He always talks about those people you seek to serve. And
Mm.
when you start understanding business like that, that you're actually starting to seeking to serve somebody and helping to solve their problem and helping to move them forward and making their lives a little bit better, then it's sort of in a way like combines and resolves the tension between helping people become and making art and making products, all those things kind of ties them together. So I think business was maybe the last kind of little key that I needed to kind of combine all these
Yes.
things. But at the same time, it feels like tension doesn't necessarily have to be resolved. Like it's like, and we've spoken about this, I think, often as like the beauty of music is in the tension. Like you actually can't make music if you don't have tension. You need the tension in the strings or in the instrument, and like that tension shouldn't necessarily be resolved. You should try and live and stay within that paradox and within that tension. So if
Yeah.
that makes sense at all.
That makes 100% sense. I love what you're saying about how art and creativity is about solving a problem, about seeking to serve people and making their lives better, and putting a business model to it makes it sustainable and makes it valuable at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
okay, so nobody here's my radical theory about everybody that carries the label creative, creator, artist, maker, whatever that may be. At some point you realize that if it wasn't for this one thing, my life would be awesome. I would be creating. I would be in flow state. My all my business things would work out. And maybe for you it's one specific thing, if you care to share that, or maybe it's two or three or four things. So for me, I know time always gets in the way of my life. Having to make ends meet also is a severe hindrance on my on my creativity. I'm a spender, not a saver, just as much as I am a lover, not a hater. But that counts against me oftentimes as wanting to live the life I want to as a creator and just making the things I want to. But if you had to just frame some of the biggest challenges in your career, whether professional or personal, and I know for us, we do what we
Mm.
live, what we do, it's the same thing. What would some of those things be if you care to share some of those challenges?
Sure. There's so many. It's the
I'm sorry.
I'm thinking of like this is a really triggering conversation for me. I think there was a random side thought, like Nick Cave wrote a beautiful blog post the other day on the one thing AI can't do is suffer, and
Mm,
like creativity needs suffering. So that tension and those kind of obstacles are really important for creative people. Like otherwise, you can just be like, "Hey, ChatGPT, hey, Midjourney,
mm,
make this, make that," but you can't suffer. So for me, it's one of the big things that I find is often with the more I work in business and with business owners and entrepreneurs and especially like founders and so is like high self belief and low self esteem. Like having a
mm,
really high belief in your abilities, going, I can do this, I can make this, I know my level of talent, my level of skill, but at the same time thinking personally that you're not worthy of praise or worthy of accolades or worthy of actually winning. Like that self worth is really low. So that has been like a very personal and still is like a very personal struggle, like a deep like imposter syndrome going, if everybody knew like what is actually going on behind the scenes, like this, nobody would ever book me again. and or
Mm.
like work with me again. And that's been a real problem, a real thing that I'm working through, and I think will always work through. And the second thing is like it is like monetizing, or I don't like that word, like monetizing things, thinking about how do we think
Mm.
about creativity in a sustainable form, and how do we make a business out of it. And so I've also discovered in the last kind of 5 to 10 years, I've discovered that I'm way more capitalist than I thought, because all of a sudden it enables all of this creativity. So if we can leverage that and we can get everybody to be richer, then we can solve like a whole bunch of problems and solve those problems. We have more space to be creative, and we need to be creative to solve those problems. So like capitalist way of thinking has really like opened up a lot of stuff for me, because in the past it was always like so hard trying to make a business out of this and trying to make a business out of that. And yeah,
Mm.
so I think those two things, like monetizing it and like high self-belief, low self-esteem.
I think that is super relevant. I mean, even not even, especially, I can identify with that. I resonate with that on a deep level. The whole idea that, and for me, I think what is interesting for me, that my expectation was that the more accomplished I become, the more I establish myself, the more successes or things I can look back on as the years go on, the more that would dissipate. But the truth is, for me at least, and I don't know if you can confirm this for yourself, but the truth is, for me at least, it gets worse. It's almost like they would say, the more I know, the less I understand of how little I know. So with this, it's true. Like the more I master, the more I climb on my journey of creative mastery, that deep insecurity never goes away. It's always there. And at points, yes, I think I can actually say it gets, like, sometimes it gets worse for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's true. I have a quote of Emil Jordan, who's one of my favorite philosophers. He's an absurdist. And he says, it's stuck on my wall here. It says, we have convictions only if we have not studied, if we have studied nothing thoroughly. And I
Yeah.
think it's the same for us. Like as you grow older, you realize there's so much I don't know. There's so much that I don't have access to. There's so much skill I can still master. And especially as a creative, like I know, my cousin, I won't name him, or my nephew, like I won't name him because he's so embarrassed, but he's a really
You
good
won't, you won't, you
artist.
probably won't watch this.
Yeah, he's not going to listen to like some like middle-aged white guy like having an opinion. The so he's a really good artist, and he's like the best in his high school, and he's very arrogant about his skill. And I'm looking at his art and I'm going, and he wants to go and study like fine arts at like varsity level, and he is going to crack, because he's
Mm.
good, but all of a sudden, all the best of the best are now going to be in this program. And I think his whole life is going to probably fall apart next year when he enters into that world. And I think the same is true of creatives. Like when you're the best in your space, and then you actually transcend that space and you come into a new space. And I suppose that's like circle of life kind of stuff. Like transcend and come into a new space. You go, okay, well, there are way bigger players here than I am, and you and I feel like I'm the lightweight. I really need to level up my skill, and you try, and there's like
Mm.
doubt, and can I do this?
Mm.
And is it this way I'm supposed to be? And doubt your calling and especially because like I think creatives often we understand our journeys not as careers but as callings, as we have a
Mm.
vocational identity. Uh, whether or not you're religious or spiritual or not doesn't really matter. But like this idea that I'm called to do this, like this is not. It's not a career. Like I'm gonna go and study this and get that job and do this. This is something that I cannot not do. If I don't do this, I'll die, or
Yeah.
worse, other people will die.
All right. Okay, that makes sense. I wanna ask the antithesis of that same question. Instead of saying what was some of the biggest challenges or obstacles, roadblocks in your career and just in your professional expression up to this point, I want to ask the opposite. What has been some of the biggest opportunities or joys or things that you look back on and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I got to or get to do this in this line of work or as a creative, what are some of those things where for you it just feels like everything is working out, and if it was just for this one thing, it was all probably worth it? If you've even got something like this, please don't say the money, but anything that you can that comes to mind that can give us some hope on the back of this conversation we just had.
Oh, that's such a good question. I think there's like many, often the best opportunities and the best projects that I've been privileged enough to be a part of have been things that I didn't necessarily seek out, but that came across my path. There were plenty of like art projects and artists that I got to be involved with and work with and creating really incredible things that have gone on to win like some serious awards and things. And those things have been like a great privilege and honor, and also to have been working with startups, and especially in the last couple of years. And all of those things have been gifts, that things that I didn't necessarily seek out, but that came across my path because I think because of like who I am and what I do and how I kind of phrase my life and my messaging and the way I communicate, and then those things tend to come to you. And it sometimes sounds a little bit weird, but I can't remember who said it, but it's like the thing that you seek in the world is also seeking you.
Mm,
That it's like a magnet. It's not a one-way street. Like those two things are getting drawn, allowing those things to happen, and then seeking the next chance and being kind of true to what I do and who I am and what I'm building and what I'm creating. Is that in itself, without, and it's this paradox, without intending it, actually unlocks these amazing opportunities where you go, oh my word, like somebody asked me to write a book or to work on this one. I worked on a one like magazine cover that went on to win like cover of the year in Europe, which was like
mm,
a mind blowing thing. Like, and never in my life did I think that I would get to work on that, but it was like the photographer called and said, hey, do you want to work on this and do the concept with me? And so like an incredible opportunity, which I did for free, by the way, and like, but it still won the award, and we all like chipped in, and everybody worked in it for free, and we made this beautiful, insane thing, which has since gone around the world like thousands of times, which is
mm.
amazing.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, those are the things that kind of bring back or just keeps the energy alive. Which brings me to my next question. So our audience mainly is of the creative sort, like you and me, but also a little bit, to be just a little bit more particular, they are specifically people who are interested in lifelong learning, who understand the idea that you don't study for 3 years when you're able to carve out and guarantee your career for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And I think you are a living, speaking, breathing example of taking this idea of lifelong learning and use it to consistently evolve your career and reinvent yourself. So here's my question. How do you stay energized? How do you stay inspired? How do you stay on top of whatever the next thing is so that when that opportunity comes around, you are ready for it?
So if, I'm, I think I'm naturally curious, and I think most creatives are, and naturally curious, and like what I've done is to intentionally have certain practices and almost like disciplines that that has to feed my curiosity. So having very like dedicated feeds and sort of news feeds and different tools like set up to feed that curiosity of mine, and making sure that I
Mm,
follow the things that are life giving to me online to have like a sort of discipline. And at the same time, one of the disciplines I have as well is like when a friend recommends a book, especially because if it's a friend that recommends a book, like somebody that knows me really well and they recommend a book, I'll make a like an absolute point of getting it. And that's been a really like helpful filter to keep me disciplined and always have like piles of piles of books everywhere that I continue reading. And it's also like creativity, like without any kind of input, there's nothing to work with. Like there's nothing that you can change or you can work with. You can do your output like suffers. So as a creative, it's your professional responsibility to keep on feeding inspiration in. So I like the idea of like thinking about inspiration, like the word meaning breathe in or spirit in, and then incarnation into flesh. So if there's no inspiration coming in, no breath coming in, there's no flesh that can actually be incarnated or created. So that's your responsibility as a creative, like to keep on feeding yourself and stay on top of it. It's part of it. Like it's your job. Like, you have to do it.
I like this. I like this idea of how curiosity is the almost the catalyst for that whole process. It's the spark that lights the fire, and then how recommendations from friends is what keeps it grounded and keeps that forward momentum going. Otherwise, how do you drink from the fire hose that is the internet and all the content that is coming across our feeds today if you don't have that filter in place? So recommendations from friends. What other filters for you is helpful to you to just make sure that the content that finds you or the content that you seek out is useful?
I think, yeah, so, like recommendations from friends is a really important one. I think for me, it's sort of a trial and error as well, like realizing which websites and which services I like, which social media services do I like and resonate, and trying to be disciplined by not following just everything and trying to curate and saying, but this is what I'm interested in now, like this sort of field, whether it's art or design, graphic design or whatever it is, and then finding those kind of sources and being intentional about curating them and being disciplined to, if I'm not reading something, if I'm subscribed to a newsletter but I'm not reading it and it just ends up in going into that spam folder and at the bottom of Gmail all the time, it's like to maybe do a little bit of a cleanse, like unsubscribe to like a bunch of them and then make sure that you're reading them. And if you're not, then getting rid of them slowly, slowly, slowly. So, and I suppose it is like a bit of a trial and error phase, and we're finding and tinkering and figuring out what it is that you actually like and what you're interested in, being disciplined about it. Yeah.
All right. I want us to shift gears for a moment. We're always almost coming to the end of our conversation. I want to ask you about what your advice is for either those that are following in your footsteps, or if it's easier to a younger, if you had to, the antiquated question, if you had to have a conversation with your younger self. We'll get to that at the moment. I'm interested in when you talked about your career and how it has developed and how you find yourself now working a lot on this idea of experience, customer journeys, and all of that, which for me also is super interesting in the moment, how the idea of a good experience can sometimes trump a cheaper price or even a better product. And people will offer return business to great experiences before anything else. But I mean, just share some of your thoughts on why that is so important. What are some of the work that you're doing now in that field, or whatever you care to share about what you're discovering in the world of experience?
The wealth of experience. So at the moment, what's really interesting, fascinating to me is seeing that uh, things like performance marketing. I think some people are going to shoot me probably. Things like performance marketing and digital marketing is no longer working. Like it's extremely difficult to continue hijacking people's attention. And
Yeah.
in the past, it was easy. I mean, I worked in ad land, and the answer was always, let's put up billboards and let's make a really big like TV ad for a couple of $1 million and like get a superstar director to make something really cool. And we had those epic like ads, and we could just buy people's attention. And I think that world is waning. And I think that customer experience trumps that every single time, that people would go back. And I think one of the latest reports I read, but I don't want to quote the wrong source now, but it was like that people would be prepared to pay between 18 or 20% more for a product, the same product, for a better customer experience. And that people would, their customer loyalty would increase by like 60, I think it's like 40 to 60%. That based on experience, even more than product or price point. Like the customer, it dramatically influences your customer like retention and your like customer life value and lifetime value and all of that. So it's extremely important in a world where attention is an extremely scarce resource. So if you can capture people's attention by inviting them into a narrative, inviting them into an experience, and being on point with what you're actually delivering, not just thinking about the actual product, but at
Mm.
everything that surrounds it. Like how do you think about all the little touch points from the first moment somebody sees you on, whether it's social media or whether it's this or that, or hearing it from a friend? What's the language that's getting used? What's the visual style? What do you what is the emotive journey that you're taking people on? How fast are you in your delivery? How friendly? Like, does it all make like sense until they eventually get to the product? Because the whole experience now has become the product. It's not just the cup, for example, or the keyboard. It's everything. So it matters a whole lot, and I think in the world to come, it's going to matter a whole lot more.
I like this. I just wrote it down for myself. Where you said that the experience is the product. That is what people end up paying for at the end of the day. And I don't think you could be more right with that. Um, what is interesting for me is how we are finally waking up to the fact this has probably always been like that. We are just, or at least myself, are only realizing it for myself now, is the fact that people are relating to brands and products like they relate to people. We want it to be credible. We want to trust it. We want to be able to emotionally connect with it. We want it to be the same today and tomorrow. We want to be able to have a relationship with it. And traditional advertising, marketing, communication does not work in between two people in a caring relationship. Why would it work with brands that want to connect with people? It's the same thing.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on which app you're on if you can advertise relationships. But the it's true. Like brands and really good brands have become such a big part of your life that and the brand loyalty and all of that speak. But it's a really an emotional thing, like making. And I'm one of those people. I'm like an extremely loyal person when it comes to brands, and I've been with the same like cell phone provider for like 23 years or something ridiculous because I'm like that guy. Like those are my people. Like I'm not leaving. And
Mm,
then my wife is like, yeah, but it's cheaper at the other one. And I'm like, yeah, it all evens out the end. Like that's not really the point. Like I'm like with these people. So I'm stupid loyal when it comes to things like that. But people do have a very deep emotional connection with their grocery store, like an obvious one, or the make of their phone and the make of
mm.
their laptop. Like it says something about who you are
It
if the
is. It
attention
is.
is.
It is self. It is self-actualizing at the end of the day. Whatever I use by relay to communicates about me to the world. I want to ask you a final question. I I I gave you a clue about it just a moment ago. If you had to put it into words, that advice, words of advice or guidance, or if you had to condense or distill your learnings, bottle it and pass it on to whoever comes next. I mean, that would be
That's
easy, right? That's an
that
easy
would be so.
thing.
That's an easy sell. Let's like do that. That's a customer experience.
But
The
okay,
yeah.
don't try and put all of it together in one bucket and just like what would be the first thing that comes to mind if people
I,
say, "Hey, what do you think I should do
yeah. I think
if
it's
I
such.
want to be on the same journey?"
Yeah, such a good question because I was having a conversation with a friend the other day about my own journey, like somebody who's a coach and a mentor to me, and he was like, if you were to give somebody advice about the journey you took, if you tell it to them out loud, it sounds like the worst advice possible. So it's like, what you're going to do is you're going to go and study fashion, and then you're going to go work in like advertising, but at the same time be at the church, and then you're going to go live in London for a while, and you're going to do this and manage. Like it's nuts. Like it's the stupidest career path in the world. Um, but what I think, and the one piece of advice, I believe in advice. Like I've gotten great advice in my life, and I think it's important. But it's like to be to know yourself and know your own desires and likes, dislikes, and to follow that. Like little breadcrumbs or little stepping stones or and that's been the most helpful thing to me to think about but what is it that I want to make? What is it that I want to build? What is it that I want to read or want to discover, and to follow that desire. And sometimes it often leads to like the next opportunity or like the next big thing. But to really know yourself and not want what somebody else is telling me I should be wanting as, whatever. Or it was like, what do I really want? What do I not? And not like the key for me is not like the big thing. What do I want? Oh, I want like $1 billion exit in like 10 years. Like, that's not what I want. What I want is to make this like little next thing. Is I want to make this thing, and then I want to make this next thing, and then I want to like do this, and I want to express this. And when you follow that like little breadcrumbs, I think that's a really good way to live. Giving advice to my younger self, that and buy Bitcoin like really early.
It's, I mean, that whole, I completely agree with you. That whole idea with understand who you are and know what you want and chase after that. It's as simple as it is hard. It is
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes a lifetime to figure some of that out. I know I'm still on that journey. If you ask me who are you and what is it that you want, that's how you'll confuse me pretty easily.
Yeah. And so, and I think we make the question. It's a lifelong journey. I think you're right. And I think we often make that question I think the trick that I've learned in the last couple of years is like we make the question too big. It's like, what do I want next? Like, what is the next? It's like David
Yes.
Allen, the productivity guru. He talks about what is the next action? Like when you're going through your little to-do list, what's the next actionable thing that you have to do in the project? Not what's the end goal. Like what's just the next? And that's
The next
sort
step,
of
yeah.
like what I want now is this really beautiful thing where I want to talk to, like for me, it's like I want to talk to these spa people more because that's fascinating. Like that you could do that. That's a job. So I just want to do that. That's the next thing that I want to do now. Like,
Pierre, it's fascinating for me to have been a fly for a very, very short period of this journey that went from being 10 years old in the State Theatre watching Odelia and having that realization and how that field sparked and fueled a fire that's been raging now for close to about 30 years after that. And it's still going from strength to strength, and just seeing how all of that is evolving, listening and learning how all that evolves into the world of communication, experience, connection, people, and all these kinds of things. It is super inspiring. Thanks so much for having the conversation today. I really appreciate it. I'm going to be sharing all your contacts and how people can get in touch with you in the description below. But yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun chatting and talking through. I really appreciate it.